Stanley Yelnats is under a curse. A curse that began with his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather and has since followed generations of Yelnats. Now Stanley has been unjustly sent to a boys' detention center, Camp Green Lake, where the boys build character by spending all day, every day, digging holes exactly 5 feet wide and 5 feet deep. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake, but there are an awful lot of holes. It doesn't take long for Stanley to realize there's more than character improvement going on at Camp Green Lake. The boys are digging holes because the warden is looking for something. But what could be buried under a dried-up lake? Stanley tries to dig up the truth in this inventive and darkly humorous tale of crime and punishment and redemption. Holes by Louis Sacher. Hey everybody,
Hello.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Kayla.
This is the YA Sisterhood podcast where we talk about young adult fiction.
Woo. We do. This book, I would like to preface this episode by saying that we know that this book is considered by many to be a children's book.
We debated deeply initially about doing this book because I lean towards the side of it being a children's book and Kayla does not.
Well, I definitely think it's in some ways a children's book, and it's won the Newbery Award, so, I mean, it's considered by many to be a children's book. But even in my research, to make sure that I was right, I found a lot of people referencing this book as a YA book. Almost evenly keeled in terms of search stuff. I found a lot of people calling it a young adult book, a YA book, and a lot of people calling it a children's book, and some calling it both in the same breath. So I think this book...
We covered Charlie Bone,
and
that was probably a children's book.
Well, and Stanley's 14, and I think this book, like many children's books on the upper cusp of children's books, is right on that line of, is this for children or isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think if you use that line and exclude things just because of it, sometimes you miss out on some really great stuff. And I think this book covers some heavier themes.
Yes, definitely.
And I think it merits being discussed in more than... I don't know. I felt like it deserved a place on the show. I think it's a classic. I think it's the best book-to-movie adaptation I've ever seen in my life. I've yet to find one that I feel is better. And, you know, like I said, Stanley's 14. It covers some heavier themes, and I think, honestly, in my opinion, it deserves to be on the show.
Conversely, there are a lot of elements of this book that are...
Very much a children's book.
Very much a children's book. It's a little silly in its tone and language, and the pacing is extremely fast for a young adult novel.
It is. But I enjoy that.
I mean, Sacher manages to pack a lot of plot in there.
I did a little bit of research on Sacher. It almost seems kind of like he fell into writing.
Is he a socialist activist?
No, not really.
I only ask, he talks a lot about classism in the book.
Does. I noticed he talked a lot about classism.
And very sympathetically about the poor people.
So he started as a teacher's aide in an elementary school for college credit. And then he became a lawyer. Like, he passed his bar exam. But at that time, the Wayside Stories became popular, which is another book series.
Those are really fun books.
They really are.
Kids.
And a lot of the kids in the books were based off of kids he interacted with on a regular basis when he was a teaching aide. And so it almost seems like he fell into acting. And I don't think that's necessarily the case.
You mean writing?
But what did I say?
Acting.
Oh my gosh. Yes, writing into acting. It really seems like he fell into writing, and I don't think that's necessarily the case, but everywhere I read it was almost like, and then he was an author. But he seems to love it, and he works with kids a lot. His wife is, I believe, a social worker or a counselor. She's a counselor. And he based the lawyer in the story off of her.
That was going to be something I wondered about in the character notes, because she was a really interesting and felt very out of place character.
Kind of.
She was so specific.
Yeah.
We can talk about that when we get to
So some of okay, let's tell you about the book.
Yes.
So the book blurb is actually pretty on point about what happens. So Stanley believes, he kind of believes that his family's under a curse, but mostly it's just a running gag between his family members. But essentially, Stanley is walking home after being bullied after school, when a pair of shoes essentially falls from the sky, essentially from an overpass, but he thinks they fall from the sky for a moment, and they hit him, and he's like, oh, hey, sneakers. My dad is trying to use sneakers to make new inventions, so I'm going to take these home for my dad, because, hey, free sneakers, it feels like destiny. These are the ones that are going to help my dad break our family curse. Kind of a joke, but also kind of true. And
some sort of magical thinking of, young adults.
So he starts running home, and he gets stopped by a cop, and this is the first instance, I think, of classism really being revealed to me. But essentially, he gets stopped by a police officer who tells him that, who just asks him where he's going and why he's running. And when he doesn't really have an answer, they just search him, and
they find
these shoes, which have been stolen.
It turns out
that they belonged to a famous athlete who donated them to a homeless shelter, and they were stolen from the auction for a homeless shelter. Essentially, everybody believes Stanley stole these shoes because his alibi is, I was walking and they fell on me. And so he gets sent to this place called Camp Green Lake. There is no lake at Camp Green Lake.
It's just desert.
It's just desert in Texas.
Out in Texas.
And the point of the camp is everybody goes out and you have a shovel. It's 5 feet long. And you dig a hole that's 5 feet deep and 5 feet in diameter. And you have to measure it with your shovel at the end of the day. And you do that every day. You have to dig one hole every day, no matter
what. To build
what.
character.
To build character. You get put with a grouping of people, and you sort of have a pseudo group therapy type thing. But really, it's mostly you just dig holes. And then you have free time after you're done digging. That's really...
pretty much it.
Yeah. So Stanley goes there, and he meets Hector, who goes by Zero.
At first, he and Hector don't really get along. However, he finds out that Hector can't read, is interested in reading, and wants Stanley to teach him.
I wouldn't say that Hector and him don't get along so much.
Nobody likes Zero is the thing.
Well, everybody thinks Zero is stupid and nothing, and Stanley doesn't have any reason to think that this is untrue, and so he just believes it because that's what everyone's told him, including the only guy at camp, their counselor, who won't let them call each other by nicknames and treats all of them like they can be better. Even he is Zero is nothing. And so Stanley's Zero's nothing, cool. And we find out later that Zero stole the shoes.
Yes.
The Zero was homeless, and he stole the shoes. And when everybody was looking for them, he panicked. He threw the shoes over the side of an overpass, or he put them on a parked car. And they fell off the overpass and they landed on Stanley. He and Hector kind of get to know each other. Hector asks him to teach him to read. He'll dig part of his hole. He starts to teach him to read. Hector is full of rage and essentially gets tired of being there and tired of being just falling through the cracks, I think. And he just basically gives up and runs off into the desert. And they all assume he's going to die.
After smacking Mom in the face.
Mom is the counselor. They call him Mom.
Stanley waits a few days, gathers some supplies, and follows him into the desert towards a place that they eventually refer to as God's Thumb.
It's a big mountain that looks like a thumb. So they make their way to this mountain, and they hike up it, thinking that they're probably going to die. And they're pretty close, I think. Yeah,
Hector is definitely about to die at the end, because the implication is that Zero has food poisoning by the time they get to the top of the hill.
And he's completely dehydrated, and all he can do is he essentially just falls down and is done.
Yeah.
And Stanley kind of carries them up the last of the mountain, and they find water.
And onions.
And so they kind of nurse themselves back to health. I'm going to backtrack a little bit just so that you can kind of know what's happening concurrently with this. The curse, the implication of the book is that the curse is real. Stanley's great-great-grandfather wants to marry this young woman in his town. She's very pretty, but not very bright. And he goes to this woman that he knows that he's friends with, and she's kind of mysterious and has some powers. And she essentially gives him a pig to trade for the bride, which is, eons back, but whatever. So she's like, hey, carry this pig up a mountain every day, sing it this song, and let it drink from the river up there, which is magical. It runs uphill. And he's like, okay. And she's like, every day you sing it this song, and you'll get stronger as you carry it up the mountain. It gets bigger, and then you can trade it for her, and it'll be the biggest pig. And then when you're done, come back and carry me up the mountain, because I want to get strong, and I can't make it up the mountain. And he's like, cool, yeah, I'll do that. And she's like, but if you don't, come back and get me. It's going to suck for you. You're all going to be cursed. You and all of your descendants will be cursed. So he carries the pig up the mountain every day, except for the last day, even though she told him to. He's not very good at instructions. And he goes to trade for the pig, and the other guy that wants to marry this girl brings a pig, and they weigh exactly the same. So the father is like, I don't know what to do. And Stanley's great-great-grandfather is like, why don't you let her choose? And he's like, sure, whatever, I'm going to get a pig either way. So he goes to let his daughter choose, and she's just basically like, I don't know, which pig is bigger? I don't know, I'll pick a number, and you guys just guess the number.
Yeah.
Like, she can't decide. And he's very offended, not just because she didn't pick him, but because the other guy who is vying to marry her
vile.
Is horrible, and she just doesn't care. And I think in this moment he realizes that they really would not be a good match.
Mm-hmm.
So he decides to leave, and he leaves for America. And halfway to America, he's like, oh, crap.
I forgot about Madame Zeroni.
I forgot to carry Madame Zeroni up the mountain. Me and my family will be cursed for eternity, whatever, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't really believe in it. She also has a son in America. She's the one who told him he should go to America.
Mm-hmm.
So he comes to America, gets married, has kids. Yay. Also, way back at Camp Green Lake.
Before Camp Green Lake was Camp Green Lake.
It was an actual lake.
It's a beautiful, vibrant town in Texas with one school-like house with one very beautiful school teacher. It's shown that Sam sells onions and medicinal cures made from onions that he harvests from the area we know as God's Thumb. He uses the spring water to make all his tinctures and stuff, and he operates just outside of the town doctor's establishment, and they kind of work in tandem to do holistic treatments. And it's sort of not just implied, it's pretty much outright stated in the book that Sam's cures work and the doctors don't.
It's heavily implied.
Right. So the school teacher, Kate, goes into town one day to buy onions, I guess, because that's what ends up happening.
Yeah, she buys onions and she gives some of them to his donkey.
And she goes, sigh, my school. It's so run down. And he's like, I'll fix it. So he goes. He specifically has one of those as you wish.
I can fix that.
Yeah, I can fix that.
Yeah, but he also trades it for her peaches. She has these peaches that they're canned peaches that everybody loves, and he's like, I'll fix it for some peaches. Mm-hmm. So he fixes it, and then they kind of get to talking. She likes him, and so whenever he's done, she's like, oh, also the windows leak or something weird.
Yeah,
they don't open.
Keeps finding excuses to bring him back around to fix things. And just keeps falling more and more in love with him.
He's very bright. He's well read.
Yeah. He's and they fall in love with each other. And this is the olden times when that wasn't cool. So
they kiss in the street and somebody sees them.
Yeah, they get busted. I thought it was a bit much to make the person who busted them someone who explicitly owed their child's life to Sam, but...
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. So they get busted... And the town freaks out. Mm-hmm. They burn down the schoolhouse.
For reasons? It wasn't like it belonged to her.
Well, I think the implication was she's teaching them bad things. We're not gonna, I don't know, mob mentality.
It just...
We're gonna burn down the school!
it was like the villagers and, Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
They're there's something to murder. Let's get our pitchforks.
Yeah.
It's great.
Somebody get a torch.
Let's make it happen.
So they burn down the schoolhouse, and they pretty much tell her that they're gonna hang Sam, and she freaks out, and she goes to the sheriff, and she's like, help, they're burning down the school, and he's like, well,
I'll rescue him if you kiss me.
Yeah, basically. He's drunk, and he's like, I'll rescue him if you kiss me. And she gets really mad, and she runs after him, and he gets shot in the lake. He's rowing across.
They're trying to run away together, and he gets shot, and his beloved donkey gets shot.
It's very sad.
It's extremely sad. And she gets dragged back into town and basically...
By this douchebag.
Yeah, basically gets held there until she stops, protesting. Mm-hmm. God knows what happened to her after that.
Yeah, who knows?
It's not explained in the book, but there are implications.
She's a different person.
Yeah, she becomes a different person after this experience. She comes back into town a few months later, shoots the sheriff, and leaves her new calling card as Kissin' Kate Barlow, the Kissin' Outlaw.
So she leaves a kiss mark on his face. When she kills someone, she kisses their face, and then she just robs people blind all the time. So she continues doing this for a very long time, gathering wealth. At one point, she actually robs Stanley's great-grandfather, his great-great-grandfather's son, obviously.
Elia's son.
She just leaves him for dead in the middle of the desert. She doesn't kiss him and kill him. She just leaves him for dead and takes all his stuff. And he kind of goes a little insane. He says he found refuge on God's thumb, but no one really knows what that means. Mm-hmm. We know it to mean that he finds refuge on the mountain with the onions. So he lives, and all of these things happen. Through the course of the book, we get flashbacks of this, and we know that this has happened. So Stanley and Hector decide they're going to go back to camp and look for Kate Barlow's treasure, because at this point, Stanley has pieced together that that is what they're digging for, that the warden of the camp wants them to find Kate's treasure. The guy who dragged Kate back in was her grandfather? Great-grandfather? Yeah. One of her older people, her ancestors, she's descended from the bad people, I guess.
In town, yeah.
And
there's a bad guy who's dumb and has a crush on Kate early on in the story and gets rejected. And so he gets extra angry whenever she kisses the black guy.
Yeah, and he's the one that kills him and drags her back into town. So anyway, she's a descendant of that guy, and she has been digging her whole life, and she's the one who came up with the idea to build the camp to find the treasure. Stanley has figured out that they are looking for this treasure, and he and Hector decide, we're going to sneak back into camp, dig for this treasure. Whether or not we find it, we're going to leave, and we're going to go make our way out into the world. But the idea is to get the treasure so they'll have some money. So they sneak back into camp. They get their shovels, they start digging, and right as they pull the suitcase out of the ground and he hands it up to Hector, they get caught by the warden, and they're stuck there. However, they're covered in yellow spotted lizards, which they get brought up throughout the book, but essentially yellow spotted lizards
are super venomous lizards that will always kill you if they bite you.
And you will always die if they bite you.
Very aggressive.
And they almost always bite people. And they hang out in packs. So he looks down and realizes they've been standing in a yellow spotted lizard nest, but it didn't bite them. It's just covering him and Hector. And nobody will take the suitcase from Hector because he's got yellow spotted lizards on him and they're all scared of getting bitten. But the spotted lizards aren't biting them, which is really weird. And so they're all just kind of standing around waiting to see if they're going to die or not. And at this point, Hector, who is learning to read, asks Stanley, hey, is your first name your last name spelled backwards? Which it is. And he's like, this is what you've been thinking about this whole time?
Yeah.
And anyway, we all just kind of move on. And at some point, Stanley gets tired of waiting. So he just climbs out of the hole. He's like, I'm done with this. And all of the yellow spotted lizards just are like, bye. Yeah. And they just climb off. And same with Hector, kind of.
Like, oh, our rock is gone.
Yeah. And that's essentially when Stanley's suddenly new lawyer shows up.
Yeah.
And she's
U.S.
there.
lawyerina.
Well, she showed up the day before, but he wasn't there.
Yeah.
So she shows up to take him home. And he's like, my family can't afford a lawyer. And she's like, well... Actually, they can. But essentially, we find out that the suitcase that they found is Kate's treasure and Stanley's great-grandfather's suitcase that says Stanley Yelnats. Because all of his family members name each other Stanley Yelnats so that it continues, because it's fun that it's forward and backwards the same thing.
Everybody likes a palindrome.
It's true. If we could do our last name backwards and it sounded normal as a first name, I'd go for it.
It would sound like nonsense.
It would be like a YA fiction name. So, yeah, the suitcase has Stanley's name on it. So it kind of belongs to him, rightfully, even though the warden keeps trying to lie and say they stole it and that it's hers and all these different things.
Or that it's full of stuff that belongs to,
and essentially, his lawyer is like, I'm not buying any of that crap. We're leaving. And Hector, who was a ward of the state, when he ran off, they just destroyed all his records. Mm-hmm. So he has no record of having supposed to be there. So when Stanley's like, hey, I want to take Hector, and she's like, no, we can't do that. They look into it. They realize they can because they have no proof that he should be there. And they leave. They open it. They find all of these different, like, stocks and things like that, and, like, promissory notes and all these different things. And essentially, they rich. Mm-hmm. So what we learn is when Stanley carried Hector up the mountain, Hector was a descendant of Madame Zeroni.
And as he was carrying him up the mountain to help him, like, make it through, he had sung the same song that he was supposed to sing to Madame Zeroni, went up a hill to a place where there was a really good spring, similar to the situation back in Latvia. I think it was Latvia.
Yeah. And
shout out to
essentially broke the curse without even realizing it. And the next day, his dad discovered a cure to foot odor and became kind of rich from it, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they get all of this stuff from this suitcase, and they get even richer. And essentially, that's the end of the book.
Yeah, pretty much. We don't find out what happens to anybody except for the warden ends up having to sell Camp Green Lake not long after that
to a Girl Scout camp.
Yeah, to a Girl Scout camp in order to cover all of the court fees and stuff.
And it's funny that it's a Girl Scout camp because one of the characters that we didn't mention
really hates Girl Scouts.
Mr. Sir is always like, this ain't a Girl Scout camp.
I took a count of those.
Did you really?
I did.
That's amazing. It's a lot. What is the count?
It is 8 times by Mr. Sir, twice by Zero, and once by another character on page 229 that I didn't write down.
Dang.
Yeah, so Girl Scouts get mentioned a lot.
So it's funny.
Yeah.
There aren't really a lot of, proper, overly, arching themes in this, so much as, fate versus destiny.
Exactly.
And friendship.
I would also say poverty and classism as a theme.
I think it's a theme that's there, but I don't think it's,
a main theme.
Mm-hmm. Kind of I think another theme would be, finding good in bad situations, because,
yeah. The
Stanley and his family, they're
that.
all very optimistic, and and Stanley throughout the whole book, even as he's in this terrible situation and was falsely accused and essentially falsely punished, is just whatever, I'm just going to do the thing. I'm going to lie to my mom and pretend like I'm at a really fun camp, and hey, maybe I'll lose some weight. He's very optimistic.
Mm-hmm. And he's not wrong. He does end up making friends, losing weight, and becoming more confident. I
think the biggest overarching theme, the main one, would be fate versus destiny.
Yeah, destiny is the one that I kept coming back to when I had to come up with something. I don't even know that it's fate versus destiny, because those are the same thing.
Well, yeah.
But I think it's more of a, what is the nature of destiny?
Yeah.
Because, I one question I even wrote down was, does fate respond to good intentions?
Ooh.
Because everything good that happens as a result of good moral growth. Mm-hmm. And whenever a character has a moral lapse or a selfish moment, like Elia, that's when things go bad. So destiny as a function maybe to being a good person is interesting. It's something I thought we might want to discuss.
Yeah, no, I think that's, I definitely think that rings true. Even with Hector. So, the other thing I forgot in the plot, or maybe I told you. Hector's the one that stole the shoes. I told you. Yeah. Hector's the one that stole the shoes. But he feels bad about it, and he actively tries to kind of make up for it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really interesting when Stanley finally realizes kind of why Hector has been trying so hard. I'm sorry, I know everybody calls him Zero.
I just can't call...
It really upsets me, kind of. Mm-hmm. And even after they become really close, Stanley still calls Hector Zero. Or not immediately.
It's supposed to be short for Zeroni.
It is, but
it's a baseball nickname.
After so many people have called him nothing and said he's a zero, I just really I have a hard time calling him Zero. Did you want to elaborate more on your question, or?
Not really. I just wanted to kind of get an idea of what you thought.
No, I agree. I think that
was what it seemed to be saying to me.
I agree.
But it's also saying a lot. It's saying a lot for such a short book. It's very dense.
It is very dense. It is a very dense book.
So yeah, Louis Sacher is a treasure for sure.
Mm-hmm. I learned that apparently there are pseudo sequels to this.
Interesting.
Not about Stanley, but about different boys at the camp.
See, that's something I want to talk about. At some point in this is the inconsistent way the boys at the camp seem to be written to me. Mm-hmm. I know that was something we probably would have talked about at the end, but all of the boys at the camp seem to be written in such a way that their behavior is convenient to the plot. And I remember it not being that way all those years ago when I read the book, and I think I kind of hit upon why. I think they did a better job with those particular characters in the movie.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, and I don't feel that way about a lot of stuff. I think on a lot of them, they were very parallel in a lot of ways. But there were a few things that I thought the book did much better, like not having all of that weird Mr. Sir stuff at the end of his story that sort of implied unintentionally or intentionally that Mr. Sir was a very deeply closeted transgender person.
Wait, I don't remember that being a thing.
It was like, Marion's not a boy's name. It's not. That whole John Boyd creepy line.
I don't think that's how they meant.
Maybe. I know that's not necessarily how they meant it, but I read it that way for years until like someone pointed out that there was another read. Like, because how else would you take it? Is Marion's not a boy's, like, I thought Marion was a girl's name, and those responses, it is.
Oh.
Do you not remember that line?
Yeah, no, I do. I just didn't take it like he was trans. I just thought it was supposed to be like my parents gave me a girl's name. And
that's what it's supposed to be, but that did not occur to me at all. It came across.
Yeah, no, that's what I was saying. Your way of interpreting it is so interesting.
But my way of interpreting it is apparently very common. Because I looked it up and I was like, is Mr. Sir a transphobic character? And apparently a lot of other people were curious about that. So I don't think it read as effectively as the movie was hoping it would.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Plus,
way off, but
yeah,
that's interesting.
I know it was like a weird direction to go.
No, I think that the book didn't shy away from some things that the movie actually did, like the scene where Trout, the douchebag from Green Lake, finds Kate and basically tells her, "Hey, like, give me this." In the book, they kind of like beat the crap out of her legs with a shovel and like tie her legs together. And like in the movie, I don't remember it being quite that violent.
Well, it wasn't. In the movie, they find her out under the boat, which, you know, is way more tight story-wise.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think keeping it... I think he gave just enough sort of visceral detail for the age group of the book. Yeah. Without being shy. And at the same time, I think the movie was maybe geared towards a wider audience.
Yeah, I agree.
I think showing the things that you read in the book would not have been okay. It was a bit Tarantino-esque. Yes. For sure. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the boys that go to Camp Green. Like you mentioned the characterization, but I think the main boys I wanted to talk about would be Stanley and Zero. Yeah. But Stanley especially is very likable.
Yeah, he's fun. He's a gentle giant, I think is how I described him. He's a gentle giant.
That is exactly what I thought as I was reading him several times. He's a gentle giant. And like he talks about he gets made fun of because he's bullied by someone who's much smaller than him. But like it was really poignant to me because that does happen that I think Stanley's really interesting because it shows that people get sort of prejudged by both the way that they look money-wise because of where he comes from. His family's really poor, and multiple times he gets judged because of the money that he supposedly has based on how he looks. But on top of that, because he's a bigger gentleman, he talks about even his teachers kind of say things that are hurtful without meaning to and things like that, and sort of they kind of make fun of him a little bit when he says that someone smaller than him is bullying him. And I think it also shows like people who are not necessarily conventionally attractive are treated
what is that like children's book about the bull that doesn't want to be a bullfighting bull?
I don't know.
I think they made like a Pixar movie out of it, or like a Disney movie. Okay, never mind then. I'm sorry. But yeah, they even call him the Caveman. Yeah. Which is a cute name.
It is cute.
It's a cute nickname.
It's cute. And watching him find out that they're talking about him is really cute because he's just like, yeah, I don't want to mess with the Caveman. Caveman sounds scary. I don't want to deal with that. And then he realizes that they mean him, and he's just like so excited that he has a nickname and is like being included.
Yeah, and I feel that. Yeah. I think everybody who's ever been a tween has felt that. Yeah. That's the feeling of being a tween in a nutshell. I think Stanley's a sweet character. I think he's pretty consistently written. It's hard to go wax poetic about this book because it is just very good. Yeah. Like, it's
short and sweet and
I will say,
good.
He didn't read as a 14-year-old to me when I was reading this book, and because I was trying to read it more from the perspective of it being a YA book, which is never a way I've ever approached this book before. But he didn't read as 14 to me.
He reads as like 12, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking 11, 12 is how he reads, because I hate to be indelicate, but there's not really a sexual element to his observations about the world that I would expect to be there with a 14-year-old.
Yeah, I think
the only time it comes up is
when they find the boat, And he's like, oh, I bet she was very pretty.
Yeah, I bet she was a pretty lady.
And that's it.
And it was mostly him teasing Hector.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I don't want to, like, make that seem unusual either, because asexual people are out there, but it doesn't even come up in the context of the other boys bringing that kind of stuff up. And that just is very inauthentic to my experience.
With teenage boys.
And even teenage girls. Like, at a certain point, those hormones hit, and you're like, once you're in a group, like a same-gendered age group, oh my God. Like, it's all you can think about when you're 14.
And I think, too, like, maybe that's something that Sacher didn't really want to include, but even if he didn't, he doesn't even allude to it, really.
Exactly.
Which isn't necessary, but it is...
It just makes it feel a bit more juvenile in tone.
Yeah, and I think Stanley especially, like, I don't know where in the book it says his age. I looked for it, I couldn't find it. I looked it up to find out that he was 14 because we talked about, I was like, I don't know. I thought he was older, but you thought he was younger and he reads as younger. So I just looked it up and it said he was 14. So yeah, he definitely reads a bit younger, but he's very optimistic. He's kind of observant. He acts like he's not. He kind of plays dumb a lot, but he seems...
That's something him and Zero have in common.
Yes, and that's something, they have a lot in common. Zero is such an interesting character to me.
Well, Madame Zeroni implies that Elia seems to have a lot in common with her son, too.
Yeah.
So I think there's, a sort of...
Red string of fate. Not really red string of fate, but we
were destined to be besties. Because, Elia, when he moved to America, searched that guy out.
Yeah, he tried to find Madame Zeroni's son when he went to America multiple times and just couldn't find him. He would just ask people on the street, do you know a Zeroni? And they were all like, you're nuts.
Please stop.
I just love Zero. I'm sorry, Hector.
Hector is a great character. He's so cute.
I
am sort of thinking about the little actor that plays him.
Gordon Blue. I know. I was going to talk about that. I hate to keep talking about the movie because we don't talk about movies in this. Like, I want you guys to notice that we completely swerve talking about the Maximum Ride movie. But I have to talk about the movie with this because it's so good. And, like, Hector is just precious. But after seeing the movie with Gordon Blue playing Hector... I cannot envision him any other way, and, like, he's just so precious to me as a character, and even reading it, I imagined young Gordon playing him. And I also
imagined Shia LaBeouf.
I did too!
Because they basically built that kid in a test tube to play Stanley Yelnats.
He did such a good job.
That was, like, what a flashpoint moment for 5th graders, you know? Like,
it was
what a wild time to be alive, you guys.
Yeah, it's...
We had a moment.
And Hector has a lot going on below the surface. And I think reading it, something that they don't show in the movie as much, and something I didn't catch the first time I read this book before they made it a movie. And I read this book several times before they made it a movie, but Hector is full of rage.
Oh.
And I don't think I picked up on that as much until I was older reading it. But anytime he talks about Hector, Hector looks angry. The only time he sees Hector smile, it surprises him, and not in in the couple books that we've read before. It's like he smiled and it's a big deal because he's so stoic. Yeah, this actually felt real to a person who doesn't smile very much, and it feels like a moment.
Oh, that was jarring. That was a face I'm not used to seeing,
and in a good way, but in not in a. And then he smiled, and it was big because he's so stoic. It was in a. He legitimately is stoic and very rarely smiles. And
I wouldn't even say stoic. I would just say he's very cagey.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
He knows better than to play his cards.
Yeah.
Like, put them all out.
He's so used to fending for himself that he just kind of...
is defensive.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of kids like that.
I think that he's a very interesting character. I was just shocked at how full of rage he was that I never caught before. And also, he needs some therapy. And not in I'm not saying that he needs therapy, but in a legitimately, he finds Stanley and he decides he wants to befriend Stanley. And the moment that he does, it's like this lid explodes off of him, and all he wants to do when they're in the desert and he's almost dying is just spill his life story. And he's just going on and on about everything that's happened in his life. And it's horrible. I mean, he was on his own at 9, I think, maybe less. He was sleeping in a slide by himself because his mom just didn't come back one day. They were already homeless, and she was like, stay here, I'll come back. And she didn't, and he lived in a slide for 2 or 3 months. But he just continues to monologue about his past to Stanley, and I think it speaks a lot to their friendship, which I would love to discuss more because their friendship is everything. But also because I just think he's found someone he feels like he can talk to and that will listen to him.
Absolutely. They're kindred spirits.
I think so.
And they're kind of paralleled that in the way that one of them is very big and one's very little, and their talents kind of match each other, and they have very similar goals. I think pitching them together to work together was a very good idea.
Yeah. And I think both Stanley and Zero, if we want to talk about them and their friendship, we can do it an hour later. I don't know if you want. But I think both of them are really, really good points for the author to show how young kids can fall through the cracks with adults sometimes, especially when they're considered delinquents. And how people just sort of brush them aside and put them in a spot.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the book, it's extremely effective to see that with Hector and with Stanley. I would say, though, I think they still did a better job overall with that particular element of the story in the movie, just because they just had such pitch-perfect casting.
They really did.
And because they really made the characters of the boys from Camp D more consistent. Like, they gave, those little actors were so good, and then on top of it, they had much more well-written characters, or more tightly written characters.
Well, Louis Sacher actually worked on the screenplay for that.
I wonder if that was one of those rare good moments where he had just enough time to be thinking about things he should have fixed, but not enough time to overthink it and J.K. Rowling it.
Start a Twitter.
It was just, I'm telling you, it was a moment.
Yeah, I think that's part of why it was so good. But I wanted to kind of talk about them in specific as to how kids can fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And also just their friendship is
cute.
So important for young people to read, especially young boys. Because this book could be a boy book or a girl book. Not that I think you should gender books, but
it's a good way to show male friendships that are healthier.
Yeah.
I really do. Anytime you can show healthy friendships in young adult fiction of any gender variety, I'm on board.
I agree.
Because that's something that's so weirdly toxic in a lot of young adult books. Why are you guys, none that we've picked, but we've been quite picky about what we've read so far. But there are a lot of YA books where that sort of toxic anti-friend element is there, and that's not a good model for
and you can
kids.
show competitiveness without being toxic, and he does that in this book.
Exactly.
When they are leaving God's Thumb and they're on their way back to camp, and they don't have a whole lot of water, but they have kind of enough to get back, they sort of have this competition of who can go the longest without needing a drink of water. And it's not in any way malicious. It's 100% them both trying to
conserve water
and also help the other one to conserve water. And they're both like, oh, I'll drink if you want to. If you're thirsty, we can stop. Kind of a teasy. And then when they do decide to drink water, when they both have gotten to a point where they're very thirsty, they're like, let's drink water together. That way,
I'm only going to drink so that you'll
have some.
Yeah, so that you'll have some water, because I don't want you to get dehydrated because you're stubborn.
Yeah. and it's very cute, but also it shows another way of being competitive that is supportive and not we're rivals.
It's a very big brother, little brother relationship in a lot of ways. Yeah. I quite like that. One thing I thought was really important, and I know it's kind of obvious, sorry about any rain sounds.
Listen, every time we try to record, it rains here. I don't know how they know. They're trying to stop us.
Yeah. But we can't stop.
We won't stop.
And I'm not going to continue that.
So let's talk about Elia.
Let's talk about Elia. Elia Yelnats is a cute young man, and I think it's really interesting how his story seems to mirror Stanley's in a lot of ways. I know that's pretty obvious. It's kind of baby's first literary device, but it's still important to point out those techniques and when they're used well. And watching Stanley take this same or a similar journey to his great no good
dirty rotten pig stealing grandfather,
something like that.
So
it's on the back of the book. But their struggles are very similar. It kind of goes back to the fate thing. The thing where they diverge is in their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Stanley prioritizes his friend, and Elia prioritizes his own feelings.
Yeah.
That's sort of obviously the moral of the story, but it's a good way to give the moral of the story to your audience without spelling it out explicitly.
Yeah.
Like, it's make moral decisions and care about the people around you, because they will help lift you up out of this.
And I like that Elia isn't bad. He's not bad
he's a good kid.
For not having taken Madame Zeroni up the mountain. He just was young and
selfish.
And made it, he kind of just, it slipped his mind type. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even like an active selfish decision, because it says like in the book, like he talks about like, I would have done it. I wanted to do it. I wanted to help her. I just forgot.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think that that's important too, in that sort of like taking the time to remember things is a form of selflessness.
Exactly.
And I thought that was
It's a good lesson for like young people, especially young teenagers. Mm-hmm. I think that is a lesson that is often hard learned for many of them. Not that I would know from experience. Quick note about Madame Zeroni. She is Egyptian.
Yes.
They sort of have a flippant line early on in the story, which I think is more of like a character line, where Stanley says she was a gypsy or something.
Yeah, I knew that was going to come up.
You know me. You knew I was going to bring it up.
I did.
That's a problem. I don't remember if that was... We didn't watch the movie just because the movie... Shia LaBeouf has a lot of power. And he will ruin our review.
It's true.
He's
in a good way.
Probably.
He would make our review better, but like...
Possibly.
It would be about
Honestly,
the movie. We would be reviewing the movie. Point being, prior to this, we haven't watched the movie in a long time, and we're still drawing on it a lot in this on accident. So, like, it would have...
It invites comparison.
Very deeply affected our review, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Elia is a really interesting character. Mm-hmm. And I think he draws a lot of parallels with Stanley. I do think he's interesting and different a little bit, in that I liked the part where he came forward to his wife about being cursed and being like, you can leave. Or she wasn't his wife yet. He was like, you should leave me. I'm cursed. And her being like, nah.
Yeah, whatever.
Nah, you're cursed, but I'm just going to tell all of our kids about it and make you out to be the no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather, essentially. She's like, I'm starting your legend. She made a
joke out of it.
Yeah, and he found someone who could meet him intellectually on his level, and I thought that was a really interesting thing to include in the book.
It was a good lesson for kids, too. It's sort of, maybe sometimes, if you're a smart person, what you need in a partner is another person who's on the same level as you, who can communicate well with you. Because... And that's true even, I guess, if you're not super intellectually inclined. Like, you know, I think I don't want to cast aspersions onto Elia's first love. They joke about her saying, you know, her head's as empty as a flower pot. But it seems to me like she just doesn't care about marriage that much. She knows she's going to be fine in that regard. It's not something she's worried about. So that's just not one of her priorities.
Yeah.
I think we covered most of the Madame Zeroni stuff. Like, other than the fact, I found her a much more interesting character now that I'm an adult than I did when I was a kid.
Yeah.
She was just sort of generic fortune teller machine gypsy lady.
The movie doesn't really give her a lot of... That's one thing that the book does better than the movie.
I agree. I think the book did Madame Zeroni a lot better. And
the movie was just like, here's the curse. Whereas the book was like, here's a person.
Yeah, exactly. And it was more about their relationship. The curse is sort of always an is it real, is it not real sort of thing.
Yeah.
So otherwise it would sort of go against the point of the theme, I think. But yeah, I thought she was a lot more interesting and nuanced now that I'm an adult than I did when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
And then there was Kate Barlow and Sam.
Kate and Sam, I love this story. I think it's so tragic. I wrote in my notes, Romeo and Juliet are out. Kate and Sam are in.
I will say, I honestly believe they did a better job portraying the romance in the movie, but I think that's not the fault of the book. I think that's a good opportunity for us to talk about the differences in text and media and how we experience a story. because we got all the same information in the movie and in the book, but it seemed like more time passed in their relationship in the movie because we're so familiar with that visual language.
Yeah, well, and also because the book is just telling us what happened.
Exactly.
Whereas the movie is helping us experience. The book doesn't dive into
the details of their conversation. Like, it does sort of talk about, they talked about poetry and they finish each other's sandwiches and all that.
But it's very straightforward. This is what happened. They fell in love and then they died.
They fell in love. They kissed. The end.
Whereas the movie helps you experience it with them and have those emotions and see those visual
And there's
cues.
something a lot more, I keep using the word visceral. There's a better word than that. There's something very immersive about film in a way that I think sometimes a novel can kind of lack.
I don't know that it's lacking. I think just the way you tell a story changes with the medium, which is why book-to-movie adaptations can be so tricky.
Tough. That's why this one was so impressive.
That's why this one is so impressive. And because it knew what mediums were going to work for it, I think, and how it was going to change things to make them work for the medium. And it did a really good job of that. And it had a really, really good closeness with the original concept.
Yeah. I will say, I didn't think he quite gave their romance enough space in the book. Now, reading it as an adult, I feel that way.
But her as a character by herself, I love so Sam. Cool. Sam is great. But her as a character by herself, I really like her as a character. Not only because she's vulnerable and willing to be there in the moment, but because she also, on that flip side, can be scary. Yeah,
she, something broke in her, basically.
But then we come back to her when she's come back home and she's talking to Sam and missing him and, lamenting what they could have had and, still willing to feel those feelings even after all of that time. And I think there's something really strong and brave in a character like that. And I really like that it was addressed. I think, I wish almost that it could be addressed more, but it's... Both the book and the movie only had so much time, and I think she's not the focus of the story. She's just an element.
Exactly. It's very murder mystery plot, sort of puzzle piece plot to the story.
But she's a very interesting character. Yes, I would love a movie or a book just about her and Sam and her experiences as Kate. And
that would be a cool movie.
I just think it'd be interesting. I just think overall, she's very interesting, and I really liked her character both as a child. Young adult.
As a child, she was just a cool chick outlaw. As an adult, she definitely felt more relatable. I could enjoy the historical elements of the story more, I guess, if that makes sense. I could appreciate the emotional situation they were in more as an adult because I have more context for that part of history now than when I was a kid.
But then on the flip side, adversely, the bad parts of that would be the Warden, in my opinion, the opposite of what Kate is, which
I don't know.
They're very similar in some ways.
There are elements
I think they're parallels. I think they are parallels as well, kind of like Elia and Stanley. But I think they're parallels in sort of a what you could become type way. Whereas Kate, yes, she became a robber, but she was given some semblance of dignity in who she was, I think, in the writing. Whereas I think the Warden is just mean and hard and cold in a lot of ways.
I think at the end, he tried to make her more relatable.
Yeah, but I think that's
certainly gave us more of an idea of her story and the not great childhood she had because of her terrible family. But at the same time, with the Warden, I feel like I have so much to say about the Warden. She kept using this. Okay, I'm a big fan of using soft skills in business situations.
She does use soft skills.
The fact, I even wrote in my notes, I heart the Warden's use of "excuse me" because she's not saying "excuse me," obviously.
Yeah.
But I just enjoy the insidiousness of a woman in charge listening to her subordinate, and her only response is "excuse me. I'd like to say something," basically. And him realizing when that's supposed to mean shut up.
And also she's very strong and powerful, and I like her. I wasn't saying she's
in a
bad.
physical way, yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that
she's a really interesting villain, I guess.
Yeah, she's a really interesting villain, and I think that's what I meant was, like, they are parallels, and I do like her, but I think the point was supposed to be more of, like, the colder you are, the more you can kind of go off on this, like, bad side of things is kind of what I was going for. But I do agree, she's very interesting. She does use customer service skills a lot.
I would just say soft skills.
Well,
interpersonal skills instead of...
And even with Stanley, like, when she's talking to him, she does that. And so that's what makes her sort of transitions into her harsher moments really, really stand out. Like, when she's talking to Mr. Sir at some point, she's talking to Stanley and Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir is trying to get Stanley in trouble. She's annoyed that he's bothered her over something trivial. So she's like, Stanley, will you go get my nail polish? And she, like, paints her nails in front of him while she's talking. And it's definitely a power play. Like, it's very much a power move.
It's certainly written with that kind of tension, so you already know that that's coming.
Yeah, but it's still...
I remember that being way more tense as a kid, though.
Yeah, she's very... she definitely holds tension well. She commands a room. Yeah. And so she's commanded the room. She's putting on the nail polish. She tells him there's snake venom in it, and then she scratches Mr. Sir with her wet fingernails and causes his face to swell up with the venom in the nail polish. And is very, like, mean about it. And it's so much harsher, and it shows just how she uses fear, especially with Stanley, because she knows that to Stanley is kind of a punishment, too, I think. Yeah.
She knew that Stanley would be punished no matter what happened there.
Yeah.
So she might as well punish Mr. Sir for making her miserable.
Yeah. And it's just really interesting how she sort of, manipulates the situation to get her way on all sides. And she's just a very interesting character.
I agree. So I think briefly we need to finish anything we had to say about Mr. Sir.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that he quit smoking and no one else seemed to care that he quit smoking or even wanted him to, which is so opposite from, like, normal everyday life. But it's kind of funny because it's just...
Sorry, we have an in-studio dog.
Oh my gosh, Wesley.
So, with Mr. Sir, he's just kind of toxic masculinity in a bubble. But I do agree, it's kind of weird that he quit smoking and no one cared.
It just was so bizarre to me.
It's a fun, realistically weird detail. Like, it kind of just served to make I feel like Jon Voight played this character in a very caricature-y way, but that might be because I have a personal dislike for him as an actor. So that might not be fair.
I was never really that interested in Mr. Sir as a character, either in the books or in the movie. Yeah. One character I was always really interested in was Mom.
Yes, Mr. Pendanski, played by house favorite actor Tim Blake Nelson. Tim Blake Nelson and Sam Rockwell, I think, are probably the patron actor saints of our household.
We like him. He's great.
We love you, Tim Blake Nelson.
He just does such a good job as Mr. Pendanski.
So great.
I always was interested in that character when I was younger, even. And so to see him in the movie really, I thought, played well.
I definitely sort of saw him as interesting as a kid because I definitely thought he doesn't feel inconsistently written in the same way that some of the campers are. It feels like he's revealed to be a much bigger villain in a lot of ways than even the Warden or the...
See, I didn't really see him as villainous so much as he lets bad things happen, but he doesn't necessarily see himself as a bad person.
He doesn't care that they're going to be leaving Stanley to die.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't care
about Hector
at all. Like, that's supposed to be our first indication that maybe he's not the mom that everybody thinks he is.
Yeah. Well, and as a kid, you don't necessarily pick up on that, but when you're older, it's like, oh, wow, what? Why is he in charge of these children?
Yeah. And it's obvious he doesn't have any experience with what he's doing.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's interesting because in the book it doesn't really say that he's not...
Exactly. That's an addition to the movie.
Which I thought was well done.
I agree. It sort of explained the character a bit better. I don't know. I wonder if he's written based off of a real person.
I don't know.
To an extent.
It's just interesting because I thought it was very interesting because he seems to want to do the right thing. And like, Okay, so Mr. Sir is mad because he got in trouble with the warden, and he stops giving Stanley water. When they're out in the hot sun digging all day. He stops giving him water, which is like, whoa, you could kill this kid. And Mom, or Mr. Pandansky, however you want to say it, he tries to give Stanley extra water because he knows and he feels bad. And my thought there is that he knows it's bad and he wants to do the right thing, but he's not willing to stand up to it. He's a coward. And I think that's what's interesting about his character to me, is that he's not necessarily outright villainous. He's weaselly and cowardly.
He's weaselly.
And
that's
that
the right
makes
word for
him
it.
villainous.
Yeah. I think maybe that's why another reason we should rave about Tim Blake Nelson, and why he, in the same way that I think of that young actor as Hector Zeroni every time I think of the character, is he did such a good job of making it really apparent what Louis Sacher was trying to say about the character in the book.
Yeah.
In a way that's a lot, I guess it's easier for my brain to process.
Yeah, it's a little bit more poignant.
And Tim Blake Nelson has that sort of soft, sort of southernness to him that makes him very approachable with these kid characters. And then, you have this Juilliard-trained actor transforming into, I wouldn't say a monster in the same way that,
That's why I say he's villainous in a different way, because he's weaselly and he's cowardly, and that makes him villainous.
Yeah, and he kind of only cares in the same way, like in a white savior way.
Yeah, he's villainous as a lack of action as opposed to villainous as an action.
Right, but I think my point is more, I'm not sure how much he cares.
No,
like,
he just wants to be
extent.
seen as caring.
Maybe, but there are moments when he seems to really care about the boys.
Yeah.
Just not Hector specifically.
Yeah.
And really seems to want them to do well and expect good things of them. I just think it's interesting.
He's very nuanced.
Yeah, he's a very nuanced character, played by House favorite actor, Tim Blake Nelson.
Yeah, Tim Blake Nelson is great. So now that we've kind of discussed some of the characters, I gotta ask, who is your doing the most character for this book?
I kind of went back and forth on that for a while. I think I'm going to say X-Ray.
X-Ray's doing a lot.
X-Ray's doing a lot. X-Ray, I think partly because he's so inconsistently written, it seems to me. Like, the actor that played him in the movie
did really
nailed it. And that's what kind of saves the story for me to some extent. Because
I don't think he was entirely inconsistent in the book so much as he wanted to be friendly and likable, but he also wanted to be in control.
Right. And it didn't read well to me, I guess. It sort of seemed like his decisions ran towards whatever the plot demanded.
Yeah. But overall, he was doing the most character.
Yeah, I think so for sure. He was certainly doing a lot. He had a special shovel, and he had, he was a special boy.
Yeah. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the setting of this book just because I think it's very relevant. The location of this book feels like a character. It is oppressive.
Mm-hmm. Camp Green Lake. I want to make a biblical parallel to Moses wandering the desert, searching for the promised land.
The heat. They talk about the heat, and if you've ever been in the South, I don't know where you guys are listening from. So
we're from the South.
We're from the South. So I don't know if you could tell by the way we sound, but we're from the South, and when it gets hot in the summer and the humidity kicks in, and you feel like you're walking through soup. It is so hot and heavy.
We literally had a humidity warning in our house while recording this very podcast,
and it's only 60 outside.
Yeah, it's 8 o'clock at night.
So, but the thing is it's so, the heat is like a weight upon you in the summer. Yeah. And the author clearly has lived in Texas.
No kidding.
Because that heat, that humidity, that oppressiveness was so real in the book. Mm-hmm. It felt like its own character to me.
Well, just the setting is its own character. Yeah. I mean, and I've said this a bazillion times already on this podcast. Your setting, when written well, should be, to some extent, a character in the story. Yeah. It should exist to reinforce your themes, which Camp Green Lake does. It's sort of reinforcing that theme of destiny.
Mm-hmm. All of these places
wandering
intersect.
Cloud. There's that cloud they talk about that wanders over the sky occasionally that only showed up after Stanley showed up. And it's sort of that like visual reinforcement.
Well, and the fact that this place, not only is it real in the way that it feels, but it's real in that it is a physical location where all of these characters intersect, even if they don't ever meet. They've all been here. This place is history. It is a location that is full of memories, and it feels like that.
Mm-hmm. It feels like a real place.
Yeah.
And it definitely exists to reinforce all of the themes. Yeah, I don't have much else to add to that, really. It's a good example of how to write your setting as a character.
Yeah, it's so great.
And Louis Sacher really just deserves all the Newbery medals,
He
honestly.
really delivers, yeah.
Yeah, this book is so good. God's Thumb is another setting I kind of wanted to bring up, because I sort of did some digging on it, because I thought it was weird how it's the only thing that's not ambiguous, really, when it comes to the magical, mystical elements of the story.
Yeah, there's magic realism in this, for sure.
Yeah. God's Thumb is a special place. We don't know why, but onions grow there, and there's a spring. But more important than God's Thumb and the onions and the lizards and all of that, I think we also need to talk about the outside world setting. Because it is also sort of written as a character. And boy, Stanley lives in a society.
Yeah.
It's a really good example of another good example of how to use your setting to reinforce your themes. And in this example, I'm referring to the theme I thought was really prevalent, which was the themes of classism and poverty.
Yeah, definitely.
And the outside world actively is against the impoverished characters in the story. And I think I made a note about this in my notes, actually, about the fact that I think the movie actually did a better job reinforcing that, because they filled out the camp characters, like the Camp D characters, so much, and gave them a lot more backstory and really integrated them into Stanley's life more.
Yeah.
But we still get that sort of view, like Stanley never expects anything really good to happen for him.
And he's okay with it.
And all the other characters are kind of in the same boat.
Yeah.
And it's...
when life has handed you a certain thing for so long and you just are like, this is how it is.
This is fine.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's very well done, and it's a really excellent way. It sort of leads into... I know we were going to talk about style, but this does lead into one of my symbols, because I found that there's a lot of symbolism in this book. And one of the symbols is how water is used in the story.
I agree.
And it's used in conjunction with the setting of Camp Green Lake as a way to reinforce both the themes of, wage poverty or wage slavery, or living in poverty, and what a crushing experience that is, like the heat.
Desertous experience, yeah.
Exactly. And relating to finally being solvent when they finally, break the curse.
Yeah.
They get water back at the lake.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Which, kind of ties into, there's some light themes of the positives of feminine behavior in the story, I would argue, and I don't want to get into it too much, but it seems like when the characters are willing to be more soft, or the place is a lot more successful when it serves a seemingly softer purpose, or a more culturally perceived softer purpose, like being a Girl Scout camp, or being a lake where Sam goes every day across it to get his onions. And it's just when the lake serves a kind purpose.
Yeah,
might be a better way to put that.
Yeah. I definitely think they used water a lot as a sort of also life-giving, which is obviously water's always a life-giving
symbol
thing,
of relief, a symbol of life.
Yes, a symbol of relief, I think, was a really good way of putting it, of being poverty is sort of being poverty. What?
We're very tired.
Being in poverty is sort of like being without water in a lot of ways, and having to endure.
Live under that heat without water.
For as long as you can. Take as little take it only when you need it, as little as possible. And then to have a downpour of rain be sort of that freedom from that feeling. Yeah, I definitely think that is something that he used water really effectively in this. And a lot of people use water as a symbol, but he really used it well.
He even used the idea of stream that runs uphill, which is basically just a spring. Mm-hmm. But he used that as sort of a making the subtext text, making this surreal experience they're having even more surreal with the natural phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I thought, water as a symbol was very effectively done, and it could only have been done in conjunction with a really well-written setting, I think. And
I agree.
In that same vein. I was curious about what you thought about the chapter lengths reading it as an adult.
They didn't really bother me like they did in, like, Maximum Ride.
They bothered me more than I expected them to.
There were a couple that I was like, this is short, but the further I got into the book, the less I noticed it.
Yeah.
I did like some of the chapter titles, especially the last one, which was Filling in the Holes. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really cutesy, and I enjoyed it because it was kind of, like, punny. I thought that the imagery was really good, but I think that also ties into the setting of, like, Sacher did a really good job of making me feel there and writing things, even though he didn't necessarily spend a lot of time just waxing poetic about the scenery, describing the yellow spotted lizards. I thought that felt really real to me. He
felt it not in a Tolkien-y way, but in a this is the information you need to know so you don't die way.
But it's clear.
Yeah.
It's clear and crisp, and it felt
relevant.
Yeah, and it was still nice to read. It was still like eye candy in that, like, when I read it, I felt good reading it.
Good set dressing.
Yeah, it was well done.
I think we can make a good argument for Louis Sacher probably being the tightest writer style-wise of all of these.
Yeah, his storytelling, too, is a very tightly woven story. Mm-hmm. A lot is happening, but I didn't feel like when we read Blue Girl and I felt like we were, like, flashing back and forth, and I was like, where are we in time? I never felt like that in this book.
It felt relevant every time we flashed. Okay, because it was always him flashing back to reinforce a part of it. Except, I will say, with one exception, the flashback where we find, like, I know it's important that we find out that Sam's onions cure everything.
Yeah.
But mostly that just seemed like a scene that existed to demonize the lady that later gets him shot. That felt kind of out of place in the story to me. But it was there to imply that he specifically says that his onions can cure food poisoning. And that comes back later whenever.
And I think, too, like, I don't know, just overall, like, I never felt confused as to where I was setting-wise or where I was in the story. And I've talked about several times how it doesn't always work well in books trying to be cinematic and flashing forward and back in time and telling your story like, Memento. Like, it's very jarring when you're reading sometimes for authors to try and do that. And I'm not saying that authors shouldn't do that, because this is a case where you see it and you're like, this was done very well. Yeah. And it felt necessary. I don't know that I would have enjoyed it as much if we'd done it in 3 parts. Like, I liked that it happened intermittently, that we went back and forth, because all Stanley's doing is digging.
Exactly.
And so we have time to go back and examine these other story elements.
It's about sort of understanding the structure of your own story and knowing what kind of story you're trying to tell. When I say your story's elements should always go back and reinforce your theme, we get frustrated about that in books like Charlie Bone, for example, where we were very much at a loss to find the theme for that book because there was no element around to reinforce it. In this book, that is not an issue. There's not a lot of fat on the meat of this book. It's very
densely packed.
It's structured extremely tightly. It was. No, don't get me wrong. I think Louis Sacher is probably every bit as good of a writer as any of the other writers we've talked about. But I think it kind of showcases the power probably of a very good editor. Mm-hmm. Or I like to think it would showcase that, because a writer's never going to be able to completely tighten their own story. But if they... looking at like someone like Lois Lowry, for example, obviously like her book, like The Giver, was so, I would even call it cinematic in a lot of ways. It was beautifully written, and I would call it, literature of everything we've read this year. Yeah. But in that same vein, it very much wasn't as tight of a read in the same way that this book was. And I don't think that it comes down to literary quality necessarily.
I just think it's a stylistic thing. If you can stylistically write
but, I remember reading the Wayside books too, and they aren't quite that tight. and they're written for younger kids. I just...
But they're also more loosey-goosey. We're just having fun. Whereas this is... I'm not saying that you're wrong. I do think editors are hugely important in storytelling elements. But I've seen authors do this off the cuff in my classes. So I don't think it's impossible.
For a novel-length story,
technically, yeah, I think technically speaking, if you're really careful, I don't necessarily think...
I just think it's hard for an author to kill their own baby, but it's easy or not easy, but an author can.
It's easy for me to do it.
No, and I'm by no means an editor, obviously. You know, I work primarily in visual media for a reason. I just can't help but think it's a good example, potentially, of what an editor can do for your story if you will give them the reins to do it. And if you have a very good editor who understands like story structure and how these themes should reinforce each other.
I definitely think that is a question that I would love to ask Louis Sacher. How much was this edited?
And not in like a mean way.
Yeah, no, just like in a, hey, how much of this was your hand and how much did you have help in doing this? Because it's hard to say without knowing. I don't want to assume one thing or the other, but I have seen authors do it.
Well, if nothing else, it brings up a good point, because I mean, one of the things that we're here to discuss literature.
Yeah.
And that means, you know, bringing up parts of literature or elements of writing discussions that normal people or people maybe normally wouldn't discuss.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to say about the way that the book was written is I thought it did a really, really good job of creating a feeling of mystery and suspense. Even though it didn't try too hard to make us figure it out. It was very clear. It was like, hey, here's what's happening. It wasn't a hard mystery, but it had a good feeling of mystery, and I thought that was well done.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that just, like you said, comes down to structure.
Yeah.
It's just a good tight plot.
It's always good.
Now we get to talk about my favorite part. Symbolism. There is so much puberty symbolism in this book, you guys. Oh my god. First thing that comes to mind.
Here we go.
Bring it on. Odor is a symbol in this book for several different things. I think primarily it's a big puberty symbolism thing that keeps coming up. The smells of everything, and specifically the smells of the boys, are brought up in various contexts, too numerous to count, and not just in descriptors, but more as
part of the story.
Symbols in the story for other things. Like the smell of the bed when Stanley gets there that fades. So I think it's worth keeping that particular symbol in mind, even though it's kind of a weird one, and people always forget about smell.
Yeah.
I think it's worth remembering. Another one, colors in particular, yellow and orange and red come up a lot in the book.
Yeah, well, I think orange partially, I'm not saying it's not a symbol, but partially it's because they have to wear orange because they're in a delinquent camp. But yes, I do think that's an element.
For sure. Well, and orange also because of the peach tones.
Right.
And that's certainly probably reinforced a bit by the movie, just because I have all of those visual signifiers in my brain. But like I definitely saw he written out a lot of color imagery that I found to be pretty symbolic, especially the yellow in the spots on the lizards, the yellow in the school bus, the yellow in the sun, the yellow on God's thumb. Like yellow comes up a lot. Red comes up quite a bit, and gold comes up, I think, would be an association with yellow. And I'm not sure, I never dug deep enough into that particular symbol to decide what that meant.
It's a symbol of something.
I recognize it. I realize it's supposed to mean something as I'm reading it, but you guys, I have so many notes, and I only have so many hours. I have stuff to do.
It means what does it mean? What do you guys think that yellow and gold and red mean?
In the just warm tones in general in the context of this book, because I don't think I'm crazy. They seem pretty obvious.
Hard to say. No, I'm just kidding.
It is hard to say.
No, you guys show up and let us know if you guys think those are symbols for anything in specific that stood out to you.
Yeah, I'd like to know for sure. The biggest, most important symbol that I actually spent my time on was the shoes and feet symbolism.
Lots and lots and lots.
What do the shoes mean, Kayla? I mean, obviously, it's a way out of poverty is the initial read of it, but I think
they mean a few things.
Exactly.
The idea of walking in someone else's shoes, I think, is definitely an element. Just because Hector's the one who stole the shoes, and Stanley gets punished.
He stole them because they fit him.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he needed shoes.
Yeah,
and that sort of mirrors the life of Sweet Feet, the baseball player that donated the shoes.
Yeah. And he's fast like Sweet Feet, and he's like it's very much like I thought shoes was very important, and also he got busted for robbing a Payless or a shoe store.
Yeah,
in the movie it's Payless, like the next day. Yeah. So it definitely is. I think in a sense, walking in someone else's shoes is definitely an element of that, but I don't think it's all of it.
I don't think it's all shoes either, because there's a lot of feet symbolism in the book.
Yeah,
and I think. It's honestly my argument, and this is going to sound terribly pretentious. I think it's a critique of the picking yourself up by the bootstraps sort of myth in society.
Maybe,
especially because that picking yourself up by your bootstraps is a specific critique of capitalism. It's specifically making a joke out of the idea of doing something that's impossible, and Americans are like, yeah, but we can do that.
Okay, I'm going to disagree because I don't think that the author was against or in any way averse to capitalism.
I think
they were against classism.
Right.
And I do think I could see maybe some of that, but also the whole thing with the end, the way it is resolved is just
everybody was
have
rich
money.
The end, yeah.
And so I don't think that it was really hey, let's solve classism. It's the best way to solve classism is to find stolen money.
No, that's not really what I was going for necessarily, but more of a critique of a culture that tells these kids that that people like Mr. Pendansky tells these kids the only way you're going to get out of this situation is by picking yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah, okay.
That's more what I'm going for.
Yeah, I can see that.
And you can't pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Have you ever tried? It's impossible. That's the point of the phrase. It's a joke. It's a joke about people who think they can do that.
Yeah.
Because you need to rely on the people around you sometimes, and they need to rely on you, and you have to be part of a community in order for people to flourish.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of the story.
Yeah, okay. I could see that part of it. I thought you meant a versus capitalism
version
of it. And I was
sorry.
I don't think that he necessarily had that. I do think
he's critical of capitalism in this story.
In some places, but then not enough. Yeah. Not enough. That's not how I meant that, but I had more to that sentence.
Yeah. I
was going to say not enough for I think that to be a huge part of it. I think he kind of waffles back and forth on that. I think it's more of I hate parts of it, but I don't hate it overall. And I do think the bootstraps thing is definitely
kind of relates back to the immigration elements of the story, too.
Yeah. I definitely think he had some opinions on America.
Yep. I feel like he's got some opinions. And also chose nicknames, the nature of nicknames in this story. A lot of characters have nicknames, not just the boys in Camp D.
Sure.
In fact, one of the bad guy type characters in the story, Trout Walker, had a nickname. Trout wasn't his name.
Yeah, it was because his feet smelled bad.
Mm-hmm. And it just, and Kissin' Kate Bartlett, it seems like people only become free when they are known by their nicknames. And I know that I'm only... Okay. So, listeners, we started watching Watchmen.
Oh, God. No. We're not bringing this into the podcast.
Okay. But the reason I bring it up is it's a similar theme. This idea that the mask will set you free kind of concept.
She's gone, guys.
I'm gone. Apparently, I'm gone. You don't think that?
It's going to be the longest podcast
You don't think the
ever.
idea of a self-determined name as a symbol of freedom?
I do. I don't know. I think maybe we've been. I don't know.
Okay, then fine. We won't agree on that one. But nicknames are definitely a symbol. So, what would you say they are a symbol of?
I think that they were more a symbol of familiarity. I think they were...
So Kissin' Kate Barlow is familiar? Trout was familiar?
Yeah, I think because they were in a small town and, I think the idea is, What
about Sweet Feet?
Yeah, I think it's an acceptance thing. I think, caveman wasn't accepted until he was caveman.
Zero.
Yeah, But I think that was also still kind of an acceptance thing. Like, yeah, they treated him like dirt, but he was still part of their group. And I think getting a nickname was considered, like, having someone bestow a nickname.
He showed up with a nickname.
Having someone bestow a nickname upon you is what makes you somebody. It's what makes you...
So you think it's more about...
It's about...
What?
Acknowledgement and familiarity to me.
So for you, it's a more, like, community-oriented thing.
Yeah, I think it's about being acknowledged as a person. I don't think...
Because I definitely read it as...
Stanley wasn't acknowledged until he was Caveman. And then he was...
But Zero wasn't acknowledged until he was Hector.
That's true. Well, I think his is sort of a reverse of that. But I think everybody else's... No, I think his was supposed to be a reverse of that. I think it was an active thing of he showed up with this nickname and having to break out of that and use his real name. I think it was sort of a backwards thing.
I feel like I have so many questions for Louis Sacher after reading this book as a grown-up. Like, and probably, like, Trekkie questions. Like, the worst kind.
But I think that it was more of a form of acknowledgement. You are acknowledged as a part of the community when you get a nickname. And I think that Hector was probably the only exception to that. And I think that was on purpose. That was my opinion. I don't know.
Well, we can move on from that because one that I was actually curious to see what you thought was spit. Because spit comes up a lot in the story. Between Mr. Sir spitting sunflower seeds, Madame Zeroni spitting for luck, Elia spitting for luck, the boys spitting in their holes. It comes up a lot in the story. And I sort of felt torn about what that might mean overall in the story. Like, is it a further
was more
extension?
of like a southern, like...
Spitting in your hole when you're done digging it?
I thought it was more like a...
It felt like reinforcement every time it came up. So I want to say it's symbolic of something, even though spitting does have more traditional, like, spit for luck, spit because you're disgusted, spit for this reason or that reason. It comes up a lot.
I didn't think it meant anything, but I don't know that means it doesn't mean anything. I didn't really pay that much attention to it.
I just didn't want to assume that because this is a book written for 5th graders that it's just spitting because people talk about spitting. I kind of wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt that maybe it meant something more because it came up so much. It came up a lot.
I don't know.
Like, in a pointed way.
Yeah, I don't know. But also as an author, a lot of times...
Weigh in.
Yeah, weigh in, guys. Let us know what you think.
I want to know your opinion. Help me.
But also, I think as an author, sometimes stuff seems symbolic when it's not.
True, but if you... Like, I can say this as a visual artist. If you accidentally put symbolism in your work... It's there now.
No, I agree. I agree. But I don't know that was necessarily... I don't know that
intention isn't required.
Yeah, I don't know that was intention. I think that may have just been repetitive action that he felt fit within the story, like a Western. There's lots of spitting in Westerns as well. So I think this has Western elements, and I think that maybe that was just something that he tacked on as a byproduct.
Final thought about symbolism, and this one's just a little baby one. The pitchfork, literally called a pitchfork in the book that the warden uses when she pulls out of the truck to sift through dirt and start driving the boys to work harder. I just put a note down that was a bit on the nose. And that is it for symbols for me.
Is there anything else that you really felt... Oh, the only other thing I wanted to discuss about the book, like, as a whole... is just that I know it had to be this way, and I liked it in this book, but I don't always, is that everything sort of converged, because it had to, and like a happy ending. And I don't necessarily hate that. I know a lot of people do, and it's like, oh, it's a story, and like everything feels like it's gotta happen. You know what I mean? Like that sort of, but I don't necessarily hate that, and I thought it was well done in this book, and I liked it.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to bring up that it does happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's very much like a... And now all of the things that have to happen at once.
Yeah. But that's a very mystery story, too.
Exactly. Which is why I think I liked it. Is because it felt like the end of a mystery.
I'm willing to give it a pass.
Yeah. We'll hand wave.
we'll hand wave some stuff in life when we have to live.
Okay, so you found puberty symbolism, so that's going to bump my number up a little bit. But I only had 4 out of 14. So 5 out of 14 tropes is all I found. If I count puberty symbolism.
which, like we've said before, isn't good or bad. It's just sort of a way for a jumping off point for elements of critique. I will say, I know it's not really a trope, but Mr. Sir's hatred of the Girl Scouts, again, kind of pointed.
Yeah.
I thought, goes back to our earlier point about how the book treats
I considered him and Mom, and also Stanley's teacher that weighed him in front of the class, mean teacher.
Yeah, for sure.
So I put that under the umbrella of mean teacher. I put crazy hair, because it's mentioned a couple of times, like different people having crazy hair. Orphan, because Hector is not really an orphan, but
he's pretty much an orphan.
Factor, he's an orphan. A MacGuffin. Yeah. And then puberty symbolism.
That's it really, yeah. Though, I mean, technically they described their outfits in the story.
But I didn't feel like it was outfit.
But it was like setting description.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a YA description of an outfit. So it didn't really fall into our trope for that. Yeah, I didn't really notice a lot of tropes. Mostly it was a very symbolism theme heavy book.
Yeah.
Which is, my jam.
Yeah.
But it did feel, in some parts of it, felt a lot like a Western, so that was really nice.
Yeah.
Louis Sacher is a very Western-y name.
Yes.
I wanted to mention, I thought it was kind of funny that Zero didn't have access to PBS until I remembered he was homeless his whole life, and I was like, oh, never mind.
Wow.
I know, I was like, what kind of kid doesn't even get access to PBS? Like, it's at the libraries, and I was like, oh, homeless kid. Bad Jessica. So I just wanted to tell myself,
I think overall this book is classic.
Yeah, I think it's a classic for a reason.
I wanted to know if Peaches could really keep that long.
They can't. That's why Hector ends up with food poisoning.
Oh, okay. All right.
I looked it up, though.
Okay. Good to know I'm not alone in this.
Yeah, somebody else already found out for us. I feel like we probably could have spent a lot longer talking about this book overall.
There's so much to discuss.
This book is so dense for a book basically written for 5th graders, whatever genre you think that falls into. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Like, it's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
For sure.
So for literary merit, I gave it a 3.5.
3.5? I gave it a 4.75.
Oh, wow. You scored it really high.
I did. I think because I like a well-structured book, I knocked off points just because I thought some of the characters were a bit inconsistent, and there were elements of the book I thought they cleaned up better in the movie. Mm-hmm. Elements I like better from the book than in the movie. Obviously there's no such thing as a perfect book, but as far as like writing for its audience and being a classic and having a lot of information to mine for us to discuss, and this is already almost as long of a podcast recording as The Giver, which we recorded like 3 hours of audio for. I think it deserves a higher score because, it's a classic for a reason.
I almost gave it a 4. It was very close.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
How about for you? Like, why 3.5?
I think I really liked the thematic elements of it, but I think overall, and it was a tightly woven story, and I think it was well done for its audience. And so I wanted to score it high. But I think overall it didn't, I didn't feel like, I didn't feel like there was a lot to dissect when I scored it, and then we kept talking. So, it's not super complex word-wise.
Right.
And I don't think that's bad. I think that's good. I think it's well told, but I don't think that there's any, there aren't a lot of literary elements in that aspect of it. So I kind of took a little bit away there. I don't really know how to word what I'm saying. I'm just sad.
You are a writer of words.
Words are hard. But I think overall it felt a bit, I liked that it was straightforward, but sometimes it felt a bit too straightforward. Mm-hmm. Like the telling instead of showing sometimes bothered me. Especially with Kate and Sam.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And
I felt like that kind of took away a bit, and also with some of the character stuff that you were saying, as well as some of the I felt stuff was brushed over, and I don't think that it was because it was for younger audiences. Mm-hmm. I think it was because he didn't want to take the time to write it and spend the time on it.
I think you could have been thinking in terms of structure and pacing too.
And I get that. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. I just don't think
it kind of weakens the literary merit for you.
A little. I think telling, not showing sometimes is good, but sometimes is bad.
Yeah.
And he did a little bit of both. So
yeah. Fun factor?
4.
Really? I gave it a 3.5.
We are the inverses.
We are.
I really enjoy reading this book. It took me a minute to get back into it, but once I got into it, I read it in one sitting. Yeah, and I enjoyed that.
I did read it, and like I had to keep getting up and taking breaks because I'm not the target audience for this book.
Oh, I liked it. I enjoyed it.
I did not enjoy it. It was a really good, quick read, but I think I would not have finished it again because we read this book a lot when we were young.
Yeah, we did.
So and it's one of those that it just didn't age with me. Mm-hmm. And I think if it wasn't for the fact that we were doing it for this pod and I had to analyze it, I probably wouldn't have made it through the whole book. I probably would have been like, I'm bored, goodbye. Even though there's a lot of interesting discussion here, I wasn't like looking forward to talking about it. Mm-hmm. It just felt like a jobber book that way.
Interesting. Okay, overall opinion?
I gave it a 4.
I also gave it a 4.
Yeah. It's a 4 book. It's a 4 book.
It's a good book.
It is.
It's worth reading. If you've never read it, which I would be surprised.
That's shocking to me.
But some people haven't. I will say this was on hold at the library
to this day.
Yeah, we never got it. I still own the book, so we just had to take turns reading my copy of the book.
Pretty much.
Because...
Luckily, it's a 3-hour read.
Yeah, it's really short. I read it in...
The audiobook is 4 hours long.
I read it in like an hour and a half, I think. It was... Really, I just sat down and read it.
It took me about 3 hours to get through it.
It was good. It's straightforward and quick and to the point, and it's not like a meandery book. You just sit down and you read it and you're done.
It's a good, tight little story.
Yeah.
Our total overall score comes out to 3.96, which is a must-read for us, I think.
Worth a revisit.
Worth a revisit, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, I definitely think it's worth a revisit.
But listen, if you're not really a big reader, which I doubt that's the case if you're listening to this, but if you're not really a big reader or you don't have time to read this book, seriously, watch the movie.
I would literally say that about no other book.
Yeah. This is the only book I can think of at all in my mind that I would be like, if you don't feel like reading the book, just watch the movie because it's such a good adaptation.
Yeah, you get everything important from the book and the movie, and vice versa, I think, in a lot of ways. Everything that I have a problem with for either of them, I think, is pretty nitpicky. Mm-hmm. Not that there's anything wrong with nitpicking.
Thank you guys for listening. If you have any ideas of symbolism that we may have missed, or what the color yellow means, or warm tones in general.
Please tell me what the color yellow means.
What does the color yellow mean? Or any other questions that you may have, or opinions that you want to share. I know a lot of people have read this book. Tell me how we were wrong about this book. Yeah, a lot of people have read this book. And if you've read it and you want to discuss it, feel free, because we'd love to. You can get to any of our stuff. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Tumblr, all of that stuff. On Instagram, we're y.a.sisterhood. And on Facebook, I think we're the YA Sisterhood page. Check us out. YA Sisterhood podcast on everything else, as far as I'm aware. And we're on Spotify. We're going to get some more episodes up on SoundCloud, but we really can only do like 1 or 2 at a time because our uploads are so big. Yeah. So we'll just try to pick our best of the month and get those uploaded to SoundCloud down the road. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you. Check us out next week. We'll be doing another book. See if you can guess what it is. Bet you can't. I'm Kayla. And I'm Jessica. Bye. Bye.